Hello, good morning. I think that's better. Thank you, Philip. Can y'all hear that? Good morning to everyone.
Morning.
A lot of great conversations going on. But it's time to get started. It's 36 after, so good to see everybody this morning. We've had a house full just with had Carrie's dad and oldest brother come down from Chattanooga for the weekend, but they've already headed out, and then Maddie is on her fall break and brought a friend home, so they might be in here in a little bit. They're not running on time. That's not unusual, but oh, there's Carrie right there with Maddie and her friend. All right. Good to see everybody here this morning. Continuing on with our study on the Ten Commandments, maybe finishing up this morning on the study of the Ten Commandments. We'll see where it goes. If we can't quite finish up this morning, then we'll wrap it up next week. But we've been for 8-9 weeks now working our way through the Ten Commandments, and I'll remind you, last week we made it all the way to the 9th commandment. Just to give you a reminder, thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. You'll remember we talked about that, and maybe how that brings to your mind just thoughts of a witness stand in the court of law. But we talked a whole lot about how we feel like that commandment goes much further than that, okay, and really speaks to us in terms of how we talk about our neighbor. Okay, who is our neighbor? Well, that could be a large description of people, okay? But just really how much damage we can do to someone else if we're not careful about how we speak about that person, how we tell the story that maybe came to us, and maybe we don't know the full story, okay? Maybe we don't know I just spent probably a week or two ago giving Grant Jones a little history lesson on who Paul Harvey is, and letting him listen a little bit on YouTube to, hello Americans, this is Paul Harvey, stand by for news And then later he would come back on and give the rest of the story, right? And you can look those up on YouTube now and find a lot of neat rest of the story. I can remember those. I can remember being with my grandparents listening on the radio. But anyway, maybe we don't know the rest of the story. Maybe before we speak about someone else and possibly tell something that's not totally true, we probably need to just slow down, stop, consider this right here. Okay? That was the 9th commandment, just reminding you of where we were at last week. I do think we began to walk into the 10th commandment on thou shalt not covet. And that is it's an interesting commandment. We'll talk about why. But I think we began on it last week. And what does that mean to us? Thou shalt not covet. Here, again, just to remind you, is the full commandment in Exodus chapter 20. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. That's an interesting thing to begin with. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey. And then here's the just all-encompassing phrase, or anything. Okay? It's almost kind of like you maybe didn't even have to list these previous things, because the bottom line is, do not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. Okay? Do not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. And is that a hard thing to do? You look throughout history. I feel like as you look at history, you think backwards in history. I still would contend that, and maybe you would argue with me, and that's fine, but I would still contend that going backwards in history, I don't know that it's ever, I think I showed you this slide last week. This maybe is how coveting kind of begins at a young age, I'm no longer content with what I have. Maybe that boy over there on the left, you maybe could imagine him being given that little ice cream treat, whatever, first. And at that moment in time, he was probably pretty content. And everything was good. He felt like what he had was very satisfactory. He's content. Until all of a sudden the girl over here on the right gets her big ice cream cone. And now no longer is he content with what he has, what he's been given. But now and that's just, of course, a small example of maybe how coveting begins. But that's usually the way it works, right? Maybe we're pretty content. Maybe we're very thankful. Maybe we have gratitude in heart for all the things that we have, until all of a sudden our eyes begin to wander. We begin to focus on other things that do not belong to us. And I think I shared with you last week that I think it's tougher now more so than ever before. I think it is. Because of how easy it is for us to get information about other people now. Does that make sense? I don't know, maybe you disagree with that. I go back to the era where my grandparents, the 1930s, 1940s. Was I so in touch back then with every little thing that my neighbor was doing, what they had, what they did for the weekend, what went on in their past week? I don't feel like I knew so much. If I lived back then, I don't know that I had so much information on all my neighbors, okay? That I could almost spy on, that I could almost socially stalk my neighbors, okay? What do you do nowadays when you, and I don't know, maybe I'm talking to a pretty wide range of ages in here now, okay? Probably people in their 80s to people all the way down in their teens when I look over at Maddie. It is Maddie's birthday today, by the way. But I think of this wide range of ages. I know people nowadays, if you meet someone brand new today, one of the first things you do is you do that right there. You pull up on Facebook and you go, who is this person? I'm going to Facebook stalk them, right? Okay? Everybody know what I'm talking about? Jeremy, go ahead and do this with your head. Yeah, Jeremy's acting like, I don't know what he's talking about. I don't do that.
No, I don't do that.
Right? We do that, okay? I don't know that it's, Jane's asking why is that bad. I don't know that it's bad. Doesn't have to be bad, and we'll talk more about it right here in just a second, but say that again. They coveted before Facebook, huh?
What I'm saying is, this is a matter of our heart.
You bet.
Let any circumstance lead us to a sinful state.
Yeah.
The things around us do not, it's how we use those.
I don't think that it has to be bad. I just think it can aid in being bad, okay? I think it can accelerate, magnify those things that are bad, because everything on social media, and I use Facebook here, but you could certainly use Twitter or Instagram or on down the line, you know.
I remember a sermon that was given right up there, the bad gossip going on the telephones.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so.
You know, television can be bad.
The hand crank and the party line.
Miss Louise is speaking to some telephone terminology that most of us are not even familiar with. Speaking of the party line, you know, I think I remember my grandparents and my parents talking a little bit about the party line. I didn't live that. Yeah. People like Pat is probably one of the last of the Mohicans, so to speak, of living that kind of thing.
That operator, he knew everybody on that party line, and she didn't tell you.
And knew everybody's business, right? Knew everyone's business. So this is like the latest. Social media on a smartphone is the latest, okay? But it used to be, of course, the telephone was the first place where people began to question, oh my heavens, can we do this? Can we keep people out of our business? The television that came along, and I know a lot of people went, man, there's so many evils in television. Nowadays it's social media, it's smartphones, it's being able to look at people, to see what is going on in their lives, to track them, to stalk them, to know almost everything that's happening with that person, if that person's willing to put it out there, okay? And I'm just saying, right or wrong, you know, social media, there's a lot of really great things that can go on there. I prefer Twitter over Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. Why? Because I feel like on Twitter I can select those people that I want to follow a little bit better. And so on my Twitter every day that pulls up, it's Andy Stanley stuff. It's Craig Rochelle. It's these people that put out, in my opinion, godly thoughts, things that can lead me in a right direction, and I don't want to see all that other mess. But if we want to, every day when we socially stalk someone, we can look at them and go, oh my heavens, they're like some beach in Mexico every week. Why am I at work and I'm so jealous that it seems like they're on a vacation every week, every other week, okay? Or we can look at, she got a brand new car from, I've been driving the same old clunker for It's got 208,000 miles on it, okay? And
Kurt, who thinks like that?
a lot of people do. A lot of people do, okay? Yeah, maybe not people in this room, but Miss Esther, a lot of people, especially in the younger generations, and I'll even include myself. I'm 50 years old, but in my generation, and those in their 40s and 30s and 20s and teens. It's a different day and age, but because of this kind of stuff, because I scroll daily. Anybody ever seen anyone just sitting here, just scrolling, just clicking, scrolling, clicking? I wish I could say it never happens at my house, but it does, okay? It does. Scrolling and clicking. Guilty, okay? And checking out everyone else. And what do they have? What did they get new? Where are they at? What group did they get invited to? All that kind of stuff creates just in my opinion, a clear avenue, a very clear street to the very thing that we're talking about, not coveting. What? All right, I'm going to go backwards.
But there's also nothing wrong with being proud of what you have and wanting to share. And
Sure.
honestly, there's nothing wrong with appreciating she's got a nice car. I can work harder and get my own car.
You bet. And I agree with that. Very much part of what we need to make sure that we talk about. And I'll go back to this slide before I go to the next. But understand there's nothing wrong with being motivated to want to accomplish, to have goals in front of you to go, you know, I'm a motivated person. By golly, I'm gonna strive to be the absolute best I can be. There's nothing wrong with having a brand new vehicle that you worked hard for, or a ranch, or you fill in the blank. New home, very nice home, possibly even two homes, okay? Nothing wrong with being motivated to being a worker to I'm going to go accomplish this. As a matter of fact, I would say that's a great thing, to be driven, okay? As long as you keep it in the correct lanes and you're focused and you understand how blessed you might be as you move down that path. You're very grateful. You're very giving with what has been given you. Okay? So that's a different thing. I just want to make sure we differentiate there than just coveting. Jeremy, you got your hand.
A lot of it has to do with our attitude of, am I happy for my neighbor?
You bet. Yeah.
I mean, because the love I have for you, I can come into your house and go, man, I'm happy you got this house. And,
Right.
you got great kids, and you got, you may not have the vehicle you need, but I can help you with that,
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I wanted to move into that conversation. I think the biggest problem becomes right here. Go ahead, Sharon.
I think it's being grateful for what you have. If you're grateful, you're not going to be coveting.
Yeah. I think this becomes the biggest problem right here. When we fall into the comparison trap.
Isn't that part
Okay.
of the coveting process?
I think it is. I think coveting becomes, the comparison trap, coveting it just goes hand in hand. And when we begin to compare with that other person, from where I stand and where that other person stands, that becomes a problem. As Craig Rochelle says, the fastest way to ruin something special is to compare it to something else. Okay, it almost doesn't matter what that special thing is. Your home, your spouse, you fill in the blank. Whatever that special thing is, the quickest way to ruin that, to break it down, to damage it, is to begin to compare it to something else. Okay? And, we need to understand that, I could go around this room and ask you how you feel about the home that you live in, okay? And I might get mostly all answers of, we love our home. It's a beautiful home. This is home for me. I love it. But when I compare it to someone else in this room, I might be able to go, well, your home's not near the square footage that so-and-so's is. Does that matter? Really shouldn't. Esther, yeah. Yeah. Esther says I don't want to clean any more square footage, right?
When I look at the scripture here, Kurt, I can't help but see the mention of the ox or the donkey that somebody else wants. And
Okay.
having grown up on a farm and in Charlton Farm,
Mm-hmm.
we never were unhappy that somebody else's crop was better than ours.
Right.
We watched for the crops of others.
Mm-hmm.
Because we knew the hard work that went into that.
Yeah.
And so I think we miss the point of this verse when we think about how happy we are for others, but we need to look at how it got to be there.
Yeah. And Dodie's just speaking to the part of the verse here that speaks of ox and donkey and her personal history, her and Charles, and farming and the hard work that goes into that, and truly being happy for other people that you see, your neighbors, because you know the hard work that went into it for them, the hard work that they put into that to produce a crop, to produce something that they needed to survive their well-being.
We got to make sure we don't develop that same attitude as the rich man that built Noah barns and
Yeah.
sit back and take it easy.
Yeah.
We've got to not get that attitude of I'm in control of things and
I hear you. Yeah.
whatever I want to.
Go ahead.
You mean it's always wrong to try to keep up with the Joneses?
Keeping up with the Joneses, that's
I couldn't wait.
Yeah.
Didn't say that I was going to.
uh-huh. If you're trying to keep up with these Joneses, then you're not trying too hard, I'll tell you that. Right? It's not too difficult to keep up with us, I'll promise you. Let's talk more in depth about what does coveting lead to. This is an interesting commandment. And I'll go to this right here because, if you think about it, this is a commandment, our 10th commandment, that if you go backwards, it really leads to some of the other commandments, Can it lead to stealing? Absolutely. Seeing that thing that does not belong to you, that you want so badly, okay? Again, this isn't just in principle. There's nothing wrong with being motivated to go and to thinking to yourself, I want to one of these days have a home like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you specifically want something that belongs to someone else, then it leads to that. It can lead to adultery, can it? Someone else's spouse. I'm no longer happy with, I'm no longer grateful for, I'm no longer appreciative of what I personally have right here that God's given me. Can lead to adultery, okay? And, I would argue that it could lead to this, to murder, okay? It did with David. You're a slide ahead of me, right? Okay? It really, if you go back and you look at King David and that whole situation, and we could talk for a long while about King David, couldn't we? We could have a 10-week series on him at least, and then need to talk even more about his life. And a godly man, after God's own heart, that God himself had that to say about David. But when he got distracted by what he had, and he forgot about, and he was no longer so much grateful for what he had, and he began to covet other things, you understand his story. It eventually led to adultery. I mean, you could probably start with stealing. It eventually led to stealing. It eventually led to adultery. It eventually led to murder, didn't it? Okay? And that's a problem. In the Bible, if you want to look it up, describes after this that God hated the thing that David did. That it wasn't appropriate. And what did it cause? If you study David and his family and that child that was born out of that sin, it created a lot of problems for David, didn't it? A lot of anguish, a lot of tears, a lot of heartbreak. A lot.
The law says you shouldn't look at a woman and covet after her because you've already.
Yeah. Esther's bringing back up the point that I think Miss Louise brought up a few weeks ago, right? Louise, is that where you read from in the Scriptures in the New Testament? Is it in Matthew? Of just the new law in Matthew speaking towards, if you even look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. I think that really speaks to the power of our thoughts. Okay? I think it really speaks to the power of our thoughts. And what you allow your mind to dwell on, what you allow yourself to think about, can become a problem. Okay? We'll come back a little bit more to that in just a second. I really think, when we ask, what does coveting lead to? We go, all right, jealousy to me is it's a problem. And I'm not leaving what you just spoke of, Esther, but I'll come back to it. Anytime I'm jealous of my neighbor, that's a problem. Many of you have already asked already this morning, can I not be happy for? Can I not celebrate what my neighbor has, what they're doing, what they're going through? I think our hearts ought to be joyful and happy for our neighbors. And when jealousy sets in, it becomes a real problem. I don't care if we're talking about property. I don't care if we're talking about someone else's spouse. I don't care if we're talking about someone else's home. Jealousy is the root of that problem. It begins to lead towards, that's kind of that thought of what you're talking about, Esther, that's now I've allowed it to start in my mind. What am I willing to dwell on in my mind? What am I willing to think about? What am I willing to be jealous about in my mind? Okay? I also think one of the biggest problems today, 2022, especially when I start talking about our younger generations, is coveting is huge in terms of generating anxiety. I don't know if you've done much study today on the amount of anxiety medicine that's out there and in the world today for young people, and I'm calling young people teens, 20s, 30s, 40s. Okay? Anybody that's younger than me, that's young people now, okay? The amount of anxiety created, really, in my opinion, by running that rat race. Hello, Mr. Tanner. Welcome. Good to see you, buddy. That amount of anxiety that's created mostly from, if I go backwards about 5, 6, 7 slides to that social media eyeball, it's looking at Facebook, socially stalking someone else, looking at what everybody else is doing. Man, I need to run that rat race. I need to keep up with the Joneses. I need to make sure that we have this, that we're doing that we were invited to this party or that party, and it just creates this welling up of anxiety in people today of checking on everybody else and not just settling back down, being grateful for what I have, what God's given me, the position He's put me in. Okay? All right. You've got the floor, Cindy.
But as a church, are we not doing the same thing if we think we have to live in such a social media and we're not keeping things simple and we're not coming to church for the right reasons?
So you're just speaking to us as a church body, a church family.
Do we
This,
need to keep up with everybody else?
mhm.
Or do we need
Yeah, I think you could apply the same concepts to just church families, church bodies, congregations nowadays. There's certainly all these different things that congregations do, and you know, however you want to describe that, the bells and whistles, shooting off fireworks, creating all this excitement for people to come in the doors and all that kind of deal. You could certainly apply that to church congregations as well. And I think you have to be very careful to make sure that staying focused on the right things. In my opinion, you also have to stay relevant to the age groups that you are trying to minister to. But you have to be careful of staying focused on the right things, most definitely. It's so easy to become distracted by what everyone else has, what everybody else is doing. One of my favorites, I've got several of his books, is just John Wooden's teaching. Okay, Coach John Wooden, UCLA. If you were to say that to kids nowadays, if I were to mention John Wooden to Tanner would go, "Who is that old man? I have no idea." Okay. Maybe the greatest coach ever. Okay? If you go back and read John Wooden's history of what he did, he accomplished, it is impressive, and it is probably unmatched. But Coach Wooden always tried to teach this to Maddie and Grant, too. Okay? Don't ever compare yourself to someone else. Okay? It's not a matter of trying to be better than someone else. You simply need to stay focused on you trying to be the best you can possibly be. Okay? Because if you're focused on trying to be better than someone else, then you're focused on something that you do not control. Okay? You don't control that other person. That life, where they stand in relationship with God, is between them and God. Okay? Be happy for their accomplishments. Be happy for their successes. But you focus on you. That doesn't mean you ignore other people. Okay? We're called to be servants. We're called to be helpers. We're called to be encouragers of other people. But don't get so caught up in spending all your time worried about comparing yourself to somebody else. You're wasting your time if you do that. You're wasting hours of your day, your week. Okay? Just be focused on what you can do to be the absolute best you can be. Esther.
You can also fall into a trap of comparing yourself to the sorriest one and say, I'm better than that.
Yeah, that's true also. That's another part of the comparison trap, is that you can quickly begin to try to elevate yourself above someone else, and that's no good either. It's no good from the opposite end of seeing yourself as lower than, meaningless. It's no good when you start to look at yourself as more lofty than, better than. That's another part, another side of the comparison trap. This is, if you think about it, of the Ten Commandments, I feel like this is the only commandment that legislates thought. You ever thought about that? Okay. This commandment really legislates your thoughts and how you think about things. Okay. We talked a few weeks ago about thou shalt not steal being a very open commandment of just thou shalt not steal, period, and what that speaks to us. Okay, this is the only commandment really I can think of. You could go back to loving the Lord your God with all your heart and all that kind of commandment as being a thought process as well. But this is really a commandment that legislates our thoughts. Why? Well, I think the answer to why is because this. Your thoughts become the things of your life. Okay? What you're willing to focus on, what you're thinking about daily, what you're feeding your brain. Tell Maddie and Grant this too as they were growing up. Your brain is like a computer. You will never turn on a computer and sit down at it and just look at it, and it's going to start kicking stuff out to you. Okay? If you understand computers, you first have to log in. Then it's going to pull up a general, basic starter screen of some sort. And then you have to do what to start getting information back out of it? You have to start putting stuff into it. Whether you're Googling stuff up or whatever, you have to type stuff into it before it starts generating stuff back at you. Your brain works the same way. Okay? Garbage in, garbage out, right? Or good stuff in, good stuff out. Okay, our thoughts, there's a book that came out, 15, 20 years ago called The Secret. Anybody remember that book? Ever read that book? It's a pretty powerful book. But the bottom line message of it is the thoughts of your life become the things of your life. How you think, okay? Out of, what's the scripture that out of a man's heart, his mouth speaks, right? Because of the things that you're thinking about, the things that are in your heart, that's what comes pouring out of you, okay? That's what comes pouring out of you. And coveting and being jealous, being angry and wanting something else that someone else has is going to generate bad stuff. It's going to generate stealing. It's going to generate adultery. It's going to generate murder, okay? Those good thoughts, being happy for your neighbor, being grateful for what you have, being grateful for what's in your life is going to generate good. We started with this question, 9 weeks ago? Do the 10 Commandments still apply to us today? Anybody's opinion changed on that? Feel the same? I heard one, of course, up here.
Well, the new law, when Christ died on the cross, he did away with the old, and the new came into being then. And I think they're probably good examples for us to go by, but I don't know if they apply to us today.
Okay. Fair enough. Esther says some good things.
Commandments in the New Testament for us to not do as well and to stay away from.
I believe so. Terry's asking a question. I don't know if I'm ready to answer the question. Going back to Jason.
When Jesus gives in the synoptic
Yeah.
Bookending, which really, even in the Old Testament, those two commandments that are bookending the other 8 in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
that's the framework for the other 8. Your attitude, the
Yeah.
attitude and the mindset that you hold in your relationship with the Lord, and then in your relationship with other people, is the framework that all those other commandments fit into. So
You bet.
I would say, not Jesus himself in the New Testament saying, hey, this is the greatest commandment. It's these 2 commandments and everything that fits inside of them. So
Yeah, Jason's speaking to this right here. Matthew chapter 22. When you want to compare old law to new law, this is New Testament. This is Jesus speaking. When he's asked, which one of these commandments, which one of the commandments is the greatest? Which one matters? This is Jesus' answer. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, which when you think about the 10 commandments, commandment 1, commandment 2, commandment 3, probably, and I could even probably throw in commandment 4, remembering the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Why? Because we slow down once a week to acknowledge the Lord God Almighty. Why? Why is that important? You need to understand the nature of God. He was the one that spoke those to Moses. It's important within a 7-day period for you to slow down and acknowledge the Lord God Almighty. Okay? We talked about how that's changed over time and our definition of the Sabbath and what that means to us today, but I think the underlying message is this: loving the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind. It's the first and greatest commandment. It's what Jesus had to say, right? And then the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that begins with commandment number 5, 6, all these things that we've been talking about, of how you treat your neighbors, how you treat other people. Shouldn't steal from them. Shouldn't try to take someone else's spouse. I shouldn't bear false witness and speak badly about my neighbor when I know it very likely might not be fully true. I shouldn't covet what is my neighbor's, okay? And so when we look at what did Jesus have to say about the 10 Commandments, you might go, well, I don't think he ever spoke to the 10 Commandments. Yeah, I would argue and say I think he did. I think he said these are, what does he say there at the end? All of the law and the prophets hang on these commandments. How your perspective of God, your perspective of other people. It's really what it's all about. Loving God, loving people. We have the same homework assignment every day, don't we? Love God, love people. Repeat the next day. That's it. That's what it boils down to. It's pretty simple. And if you sit there and you ask yourself, how did I do yesterday on that homework assignment? Well, I didn't do too good loving God, loving people. All right, it's okay. Jesus saved me. Jesus saved my life. I'm not saved by following the 10 Commandments. I'm saved by Jesus' blood. I'm grateful I get another chance tomorrow. Today's Sunday, I get another chance tomorrow on Monday to love God, to love people. How well will I do? I don't know. I can go and ask Mark. I can go and ask Keith. I can go and ask Dodie tomorrow evening, I guess. How'd you do? Did you love God? Did you love people? Didn't do as great as I probably should have. But that's what it boils down to. Last thing, everybody's about to come in here, but I think the 10 Commandments give us a great opportunity to understand the nature and the character of God. That's why we wanted to study these. Thank you so much for your comments and time being here in this class series. I've enjoyed being with you. That's going to be a wrap for us. Thank you.